I'm really, really thrilled to be here. Um, I just met Jana a few months ago by telephone through camera, and I realized this is Jana's hometown, and her book just came out, and a lot of her friends, and I feel really honored to be here and a privilege to be able to participate in this event. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my book. I kind of got the. I'm not touching this thing. I kind of started working on this about 4 or 5 years ago, and the real impetus to write it was I was exploring my own gender, and I started to read everything I could, all the trans memoirs I could get my hands on, and I really found that I was reading sort of a similar story, and in this story, someone believed they were born in the wrong body and had known this their whole lives, and then took steps to transition from one pole to the other pole. And I have met so many people for whom this story is so very, very true. It just didn't really resonate with me and my experience, and I really kind of understood myself as having a gender that held both man and woman, and kind of was in that sort of gender fluid, gender queer territory, the middle ground we sometimes call it. So I really wanted to tell a story that explored that area, and to also show my uncertainty and the exploration, asking myself questions about my body and what does gender in our culture mean? What does it mean to transition from woman to man? And so I tried to incorporate a lot of those things, and it was also really important to look at transgender as an empowered identity, and to see it outside sort of the medical diagnosis of gender identity disorder. So that was kind of what I came in with. Most of the story takes place in San Francisco, where I've been living for the past 12 years, and I really also wanted to show the diversity in the trans male side of the community. So there's supporting characters, and I think one of the things that was so interesting to me when I was going through my gender journey was how different everybody was, how much room there was for people to have their own unique gender expression and embodiments, and I really tried to capture that. So I'm going to read a short segment from it, and I kind of picked this one. The book itself isn't really about a transition, but because a lot of the photos in Jana's book show transformations, I decided to pick the scene in which I'm kind of getting curious about someone else's experience on testosterone. And so in this scene, so the character in the book is Nina. That's me, about 5 years ago. And in this scene, I've kind of weaseled my way. I'm supposedly reporting on my friend. He's having his first testosterone shot. His name's Greg. And then Jack has been on testosterone for a few years, and so Jack is going to give Greg his first shot. And I asked if I could report on it, and it was kind of my way of learning and being there. And it was interesting, as I was thinking about reading this scene tonight, I was thinking about how there was this time where I really, I didn't know a lot of things, and I was really naive, and I felt like I was bothering the trans people that I was trying to learn from, and I guess it made me see the kind of, there's a lot of people that maybe don't understand everything there is to know about trans, and sometimes I find that these people can be like a little bit nervous about it, or be a little bit scared that they don't know, and I'm a trans person, and I didn't know. So it's always interesting when I go back to this time when this was all really new to me. So Greg and Jack are the two characters. Greg's a lot older, but Jack's been on testosterone for longer. So Greg placed the covered needles and vial back into the Tupperware box and sat cross-legged on his bed. "Do you remember what your first shot felt like?" he asked Jack. "It's changed over the years. Now it's like nothing to me," Jack said. He was perched awkwardly on the edge of the bed. On a silver chain around his neck, I noticed the Hebrew characters for L'chaim, meaning to life. As he'd tell me later, he got the chain after his 18th birthday, around the time he began taking testosterone. When is stuff gonna start happening? Greg ducked his head, leaned forward, and whispered, like my hoo-ha. Oh, you'll feel it, Jack said. He'll be like, whoa, hi. You may be creeped out at first, but the tranny cock is fun. I added tranny cock to my list of names for the dicklet, or what those reliant on textbook physiology called an enlarged clit. Can you penetrate with it? Greg asked expectantly. Kinda, if you find the right angle, Jack said. Trust me, it's worth it. The teeny weeny changes everything. I wrote down teeny weeny, wondering if it was something I could, in good conscience, publish. Apparently. I had quickly learned rule number 1 in transgender etiquette was not to focus or define people by what's between their legs. This made sense. In daily life, I paid no attention to the genitals of cisgender, or cis people, as my readings referred to folks who are not trans, those with gender identities and presentations that matched the sex they were assigned at birth. But nowhere in the medical literature or the personal stories I'd read did anyone mention waking up with morning wood, as Jack just did, nor make it sound so appealing. Like me, Greg understood what tea did in theory, but he wanted to know what it had done to Jack, and by extension, what it would do to him. Does your orgasm change? Greg asked. I used to have more, now one and I'm done for a while, Jack said. But it's big. Are you less emotional? I'm less labile, but I'm still emo. Can you cry? I don't cry often. Is that bad? Sometimes I feel like I need to, but I can't. We should get you beaches, or steel magnolias. Or maybe a guy movie like Rudy. Greg fired away relentlessly, asking over and over again about emotions, acne, shaving, joint pain, spatial sense, smell, taste, and energy levels. The effects were too enormous to contemplate. I understood having a physical sense of self in the male ballpark, especially now that I'd experimented with packing. But to live as a man seemed so extreme, unbearably uncertain. How did Greg know that after devoting the next couple years to a second puberty and a life-altering change, that he would be happy to be recognized and treated as a man? I flipped my pen against the side of my chair in anticipation of each question. Did bowel movements change? Greg asked. Uh-huh, because of the oil, 4 times a day, not solid. So it's true, men are full of shit, Greg said. Will I not want to cuddle? Will I stop asking for directions? A guffaw shot out of my mouth. Jack turned around to face me. Aren't you supposed to be taking notes? I looked down at my blank piece of paper, my pen frozen in my hand. Embarrassed, I tipped my notebook back up toward me. Oh, I'm just teasing you, Jack said. His mouth curved up into that charming moon sliver of a smile. Had I believed I was anything more than a naive little pest, I might have engaged with my own coy reply. I'm catching a few things, I said instead, and jotted down. Are you any different from them? My mind had run off on a marathon of what testosterone could do to me. Would you be happier as a man? I wrote and closed my notebook. If I wanted to be a man, I would know, I thought. I would have to know. I would always have known. Wasn't that what my trans reading course was teaching me? What Greg had been trying to tell me with his stories of stuffing his underwear with a sock as a kid? His recollections of peeing standing up? Greg tapped Jack on the leg. Hey, what are you doing now? You want to go to Hooters? Fuck yeah, Jack sang. Are you guys serious? I asked. The wings are to die for, Greg said. I found chains and greasy food awful enough without throwing the exploitation of women's bodies into the mix. I knew the argument that a woman could choose whether to work at Hooters or not. But until there were as many schlongsterants run by women as there were restaurants run by men, I wasn't buying it. Greg and Jack didn't so much invite me, as they didn't care one way or another if I tagged along. And I returned to my reporter role to avoid my moral quandary about patronizing Hooters. The bright light of the sun did little to cut the crisp winter chill. A brisk wind blew debris, leaves, and trash along the sidewalk. The two of them walked stride for stride, and I trailed behind, allowing them a respite from the interloping journalist. Greg threw his arm around Jag and pulled him in close, knocking his cap off in an affectionate headlock. With that one move, Greg shattered the last of my doubt that underneath his hard shell there was anything but a tender heart. At his shiny blue Hyundai, Jack opened the passenger side door and I climbed into the back seat. Within seconds, Greg launched another inquisition, this one about body hair growth. "Do you get hair on your upper legs?" Greg asked. Driving down a deserted side street, Jack kept one hand on the wheel and used the other to unlatch the silver skeleton buckle on his belt. He untucked his white undershirt from his jeans. "Sorry," he said in my direction. Uncertain whether Jack was referring to the prospective peep show or his loss of driving control as the car wobbled across the whole street, I pushed myself forward between the seats. "Oh, it's fine," I said. "I want to see." Jack slowed down the car, tapped the steering wheel once with his palm to keep us from veering off into the line of parked cars, and then lifted his ass to scooch down his jeans. Ignoring the road, the three of us focused on the same spot as if searching for gold. We found only a pale upper thigh with thick black hair. "You won't have as much hair as me," Jack said to Greg. "I'm a Russian Jew." I too was part Russian Jew. Other parts Ukrainian, Polish, and uncertain other hair-producing Eastern European countries. I blamed my genealogy for the dog names the boys in elementary school had taunted me with. The leg-shaving intervention by my bunkmates at sleepaway camp, and the brow waxing my first girlfriend demanded to shake the thick strips over my eyes. I clipped my seatbelt back across my lap and stared out the window. The thought of being a hairy man with back belt, ear whiskers, and butt fuzz made me queasy. Using the back of his hand, Greg stroked Jack's bristly cheek. "You really are a hairy beast," he said. "Aw, thanks, man," Jack said, tilting his head away with a coquettish smile. I was just in Southern Comfort in Atlanta this weekend, which is a transgender conference, and I was leading a writing empowerment workshop, and one of the things we did was talk about the importance and why stories like mine and books like Jana's are really important. We talked about what I consider the basic things like education and empowerment, but the one that kind of came up, and I just kind of been thinking about standing up here now, is sort of community building and how I'm a writer even when I'm not writing about trans stuff, and Jana's a photographer even when she's not working on this book, and just how coming out with these books though has brought everyone into this room together. And so I really just wanted to thank you all for being here as allies, activists, artists. Jana now, and we traded books a little while ago, and I felt like I got the better end of the deal. Really? But immediately when I started looking through it, it really moved me, and my first was that I felt like I was learning something as a trans person, seeing people like me reflected in this book, and I've heard. I guess I've heard the term like humanizing and normalizing, and I've already humanized and normalized trans people, but to me it was just the beauty of these photos that really struck me. And my favorite part is actually the nude sections, and for the same reasons that I wrote a decent amount about sex in my book, I sometimes feel like trans people sometimes feel a little bit of shame around our bodies, and so seeing those photos just really moved me. So here's the official line. Jana Marcus has been creating award-winning documentary photography for over 20 years. She is a professional photographer focusing on the documentary, editorial, and performing arts genres. Her work has been exhibited across the United States and extensively published in newspapers and magazines. Jana was recently named one of 50 exceptional international photographers by Exposure of New York and received the Community Activist of the Year Award from Baymac for her new book, Transfigurations. Transfigurations has won many prestigious photography awards, including the Best Photos of the Year in both 2004 and 2005 by Photo District News of New York. Jana received her MFA from San Jose State University, a BA in Community Studies from UC Santa Cruz, and studied photography at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Jana's first book, In the Shadow of the Vampire, Reflections from the World of Anne Rice, was published by Thundermouth Press of New York. Welcome, Jana.
I finished reading Nick's book a couple weeks ago, and I loved it. It was just beautifully written. It was a lot of fun, and it was very informative, and I highly recommend it to all of you. Beginning, middle, or ending of your journey in discovering who transgender people are. It's a great book. So thank you all for being here tonight. This is an exciting night because Transfigurations is finally a book, and I know most of you in this room probably know me, or you read the article in GT this week, so I'm not going to talk too much about me. I figure you probably knew that, most of the stuff, and Nick and I are going to really have more of a dialogue with you, the audience, after I read a little bit from the book. But for those of you who didn't read the GT article, what is Transfigurations? Well, Transfigurations is a photo documentary that explores the transgender community and their notions of masculinity and femininity as they're changing gender identities. It's photographs with text that are equally weighted to really complement the portraits in each person. And it's really a snapshot in time of each person in the book. And at this point, you know, the work started in 2003, so some of these pictures, these people have changed, their thoughts have changed, so it's a snapshot in time of where they were at that moment in their transition. The book is in 3 sections. There's portraits, transitions, and nudes. And the portraits are portraits with text, and the text is each person's thoughts about masculinity, femininity, their transition, what have you, next to their picture. Then the transition series is, I think I made that word up, is 3 people who I spent about 4 years documenting their change from one gender to the next. And then the nudes are a series of post-surgery bodies. And when I actually started Transfigurations, I actually didn't have any intention of doing nudes. Hadn't even actually really thought about it. But somebody came into the studio to have their portrait taken for the first section of the book, and when we were done, he said, "So do you want to take my picture naked?" And I said, "I don't know, do I?" And he said, "Well, I'm one of only 26 people in the United States who's had phalloplasty." And I was like, "What's that?" So he immediately ripped off his clothing and he wanted to show me. And he had a penis made from the skin of his forearm. And I realized at that moment that, you know, do other trans people know what trans bodies look like? And so with the help of several people, we decided to do an educational series really on what post-surgery bodies look like, what the different surgery options for transgender men were and for transgender women. So the back section is news and it describes what they've had done, what the surgeries are. So the book was originally an exhibit that traveled across the country for the last few years and is now finally a book, which is what we're here celebrating tonight. And the book is a funny story. I had been asked for many years now to have the exhibit, which was originally 55 pieces, in book format. And I took this book to my agent in New York and I showed it to him. And although he liked the pictures, he said to me, "I have huge issues with transgender people and I won't read this book." And that was the first time I really realized how much transgender phobia there was even in the gay community. My agent was a gay man. So I was shocked, and of course that left me without an agent, which meant I couldn't get in front of any publishers, which meant nothing was going to happen here. So I just kind of shrugged and just kind of went on with things. But last fall, when the second university professor came to me and said, I really, really need to use this book as a textbook in my gender studies classes, I thought, you know what, I have to figure out how to do this. So with the great help of a wonderful book designer, Mark On, we decided to, I'm seeing a nod here in the front row, we decided to try to self-publish the book. But when, of course, he handed me the estimated amount, which was a staggering, over $20,000, I said, I don't think, photo books are very expensive to produce, and so I said, I just don't know if we can do this. And somebody, a friend of mine said, well, you ought to check out Kickstarter, which is a site that helps put donors together with art projects. And literally within 10 days, we raised all the money to produce this book, and it came from some incredibly generous donors. Some of you are here tonight, and all I can do is thank you from the bottom of my heart, and thank you for making this happen. So it's a real testament to the transgender community really rallying around supporting this work, and it's wonderful for everybody to be able to use this as an educational tool. So, how did Transfigurations begin? I actually decided at the ripe old age of 40 to go back to graduate school, and had been working as a commercial photographer for many years. And as any commercial photographer will tell you, when you actually have the luxury of spending 3 years to work on personal work in graduate school, it's just fabulous. And so here I was in graduate school, had to do a thesis, had all this time to do my own work, wasn't sure what I was going to do. And at the exact same time, I rented a room in my house to a young man who was studying feminist theory up at UCSC. Well, I thought that was pretty funny that any young guy wanted to study feminist theory, but in Santa Cruz, right? So anyway, he lived with me for about 6 months, and one night he came to me and said, there's something that I need to tell you. He said, I was a woman 5 years earlier. And I was shocked. I had no idea that women could become men. I knew nothing about transgender people. I didn't know anything about the subject. And he shared his story of transition with me, and he had grown up in Europe, and the trials and tribulations he had been through. And I just thought, wow, this is an incredibly amazing story of a group of people that are really rather secret in the larger sense of our culture. So, my typical documentarian style, I started away in my brain, and I went off to grad school, and as I was trying to come up with an idea for my thesis, I remembered my old housemate's story, and I thought, this is interesting to me, it has to be interesting to somebody else. And so I decided to photograph transgender people, and started out wanting to do a variety of ethnic backgrounds in different age groups, and interview them and find out who they were. And as a documentary photographer, I often photograph things I don't understand and try to exercise some sense of answers through the camera lens. So that was sort of what I had set out to do. And I was learning about transgender issues as I was developing the work, and had wonderful, wonderful conversations and times with a sociology professor at San Jose State, Susan Murray, and learned much from her. So when I started the work, I didn't know anybody. And my housemate had now moved on to graduate school someplace else, and breaking into the community was actually the hardest part of the work. I didn't know anybody, I just thought it was interesting. So I wound up going to support group meetings down at the Diversity Center here in Santa Cruz, and I walk in with my business card. Hi, I'm a photographer, would anybody like to come to my studio? I thought I was completely nuts. And it took a while, but my partner Amy remembered that she knew someone who had transitioned a few years before. And so she made several phone calls, we tried to find this person, and she finally did. And he said, yeah, sure, I'll come down to Jana's studio, what the hell? And he came down, was photographed, interviewed, and decided that I was cool. So he told a bunch of his friends, told a bunch of their friends. And about 2 months later, I had so many people who wanted to be in this project that it actually really blew me away. To be out as a transgender person in our culture is a very brave thing to do. They wouldn't like that I used that word, but I'm going to use it because transgender people are the most ridiculed and misunderstood of all of the larger sexual minorities. The amount of hate crimes and murders every single year against transgender and gender variant people is staggering. And as I see those horrible statistics get bigger and bigger every year, I am amazed at the courage of every single person who came forward and really wanted to be in this work. The way that I did the work was, well, portraiture is really sort of a dance between the photographer and the subject. And so, in order for everyone to feel comfortable, I decided to interview people before I photographed them. And that way they got a sense of me, and I got a sense of them by the time we went into the studio. And that helped to make a much more relaxed, sort of natural image of them. This was really the first time that I had done a documentary piece in the studio. Most all of my work I had done on the streets. And the more complex that I came to realize that gender issues really were, the simpler I really wanted the photographs to be. And you'll see that I took a really formalist approach to the pictures. I didn't want the subjects to be judged by anything. I just wanted you, the viewer, to be able to look at them. And of course, I started this when I was in graduate school. And graduate school is all about critique, right? Like, everybody has an opinion about what you should be doing. And so everyone said, oh, you need to shoot them in their homes, you need to shoot them out on location. And I said, no, I really just wanted the photographs to be a vehicle for the subjects to return the dominant gaze and really confront the viewer with their presence. Because, you know, photography is voyeuristic. And in our society, it's not polite to stare. And when we see someone whose gender is ambiguous, it often makes us uncomfortable and we look away. But the subjects of my book are saying to you, this is who I am, I want you to look at me, and I want you to see and understand who I am. So this book gives everybody permission to stare and to discover and be educated on who transgender people are. The text of the book was a very organic process. I actually had no idea what I was doing in terms of the text when I started. The interviews that I did were really quite lengthy. They were really, you know, getting to know interviews. And as I started to listen to them after I had done a number of interviews, everybody's stories of transition, although really important to hear, were a little similar. And what really stood out to me as being much more interesting and compelling was what each person's concepts of masculinity and femininity were. I mean, think about it. If you've been a woman your whole life and you decided to become a man, where were your concepts of masculinity coming from? Were they coming from the media? Were they coming from your parents? And so those stories were what were really interesting to me. And that was what I wanted to say and the stories I wanted to tell in the text. So I distilled the work down and rewrote it, because of course we don't read the way people talk. So I really rewrote the text, but then part of my process is I would send it back to the person I photographed and say, okay, is this what you wanted to say? And is this really what you want the world to hear you say? This is your 15 minutes, you know? So it was a really beautiful kind of give and take process of developing that text. Of course, with the photographs, I told them they didn't have a choice. That was completely up to me. The further I got into the work, it became really important to me to normalize the transgender community and not sensationalize them. They were just people like anybody else. They just had a very different set of struggles to get to who they are. And as a documentarian, I have the opportunity to really give the trans community a voice to a larger audience. And I have strived to be as objective as I possibly could. Yet this piece is definitely imbued with my artistic style and choices. And I challenge the audience to recognize who my photographic inspiration was. Someone can come up and tell me later. So it's been a great privilege for me to really know all these people and share their stories with you. So I'm going to read a few excerpts from the book. It's going to be a little hard because I guess I can't really show you the photograph and read the text at the same time. But there's a few here that I'm going to share with you. Should I attempt to hold the picture up? Oh, yeah. Page 32. It is open, but I don't want to drop her display. I don't want to drop her display. Okay, this is Mateo. He is 22 years old. This is what he says. I am not yet a man. I am still testing the waters between silence and shouting, still working out the intricacies of feminism and masculinity, still trying to find myself. I once read, scribbled on a bathroom wall, gender is a universe and we are all stars. I'm still trying to pinpoint my constellation. I want to be strong enough to not fear appearing weak. I want to reach for the impossible because anything less is not worth it. I want to be the kind of man who defines himself not succumbing to friends, lovers, and society at large's preconceived notions. I want to be the kind of man who can cry at the drop of a hat until I'm laughing so hard my sides hurt. That's the kind of man I want to be. Page 28.
Thank you, Jana White.
Oh, don't tell Tamara. Okay, page 28. Maybe I can do it like this. This is Amber. She's 39. I know where I'm going because I'll never forget where I've been. It was hard growing up African American in Kentucky. We had to stick close to family to be safe. My mother was a strong woman who was determined to do whatever she had to ensure her children had a better life than she did. My father neglected me because I was different, and I didn't want to be like him. So I looked deep inside myself to discover who I was and embraced my mother's power and made it my own. I remember wearing dresses in kindergarten. My cousin and I would put on these Southern Belle dresses in the playroom in front of the class, and the teacher wrote in my report card, "Wears dresses at recess time. You might want to talk to him." I liked those dresses. They were pretty. I wanted to be like Scarlett in Gone with the Wind. But being transgender in Kentucky was even harder than being black. It was against the law to impersonate a female in Kentucky. You were arrested if discovered to be a biological male in women's clothing. Young trans girls were taken in by the older girls who worked the streets. If you told them you wanted to be a woman, they would put you in what was called old lady drag and send you to the infamous female impersonator balls and laugh at you. This was their way of having you figure out what kind of woman you were inside. You see, no one can make you the woman you're going to be. That was the lesson the older girls taught me. That was my early training. It was like boot camp for learning how to act like a woman. Most of those older girls were living dangerous lives, turning tricks at 50, getting shot in the face when people found out they were trans. I wanted more for my life and left Kentucky at 19 to discover the woman I could be someplace else. Today I'm proud of the woman I am, and I work for an HIV prevention program for youth and transgender people. I remind them that as long as we don't forget where we came from, we won't go back there. This is Dex. He's
Page number? 42. Yeah, sorry, 38. 38. There you go, right there.
This is Dex. He's 30. Yeah, I'm sorry, that was the page number. Dex is 42. I want to be a man who is respected. I appreciate my 40-year history as a female. It makes me a better man, which means being honest with oneself and truthful to others. Just because I have testosterone in my system doesn't mean I have to be a dick. Some people think I now have male privilege, but I have black male privilege. What privilege is that? It doesn't mean crap. I used to be a black woman who always spoke my mind, and people would either ignore me or shake their heads and move on. Now, if I speak my mind as a black man, I see fear in people's eyes. I see them step back from me. I'm an officer with the LAPD. When I'm in uniform, people don't see the color of my skin. They see the color of authority. Out of uniform, when I express myself by gesturing, I'm now seen as the, quote, scary black man who's just one step away from a 911 call. I have to be careful of my actions because the myth of the black man is out there. People will not get in an elevator with me. They follow me around a store, move to the other side of the street. I become the suspect in every story. But I'm my own kind of black man, not the media stereotype. Just because my outside has changed doesn't mean my soul has changed. I'm still the same individual inside. My maleness is something that needed to be expressed from deep within. People look at aesthetics all the time, but testosterone and surgery don't make the man. An extra piece of flesh between my thighs doesn't make me a man.
Being a man is all about what you feel inside. Cultivate the energy you have. What you need is often already inside you.
66.
This is Jennifer. Jennifer is 47. The desire for perfection destroys our sense of self. There's a pressure that we put on ourselves to pass and be accepted as women, plus the overwhelming societal expectation of what women should look like. When I was living as a man, I projected those expectations on the women I dated. Society reinforces how unacceptable it is to be mediocre looking, old, or frumpy. The male perception of women greatly shaped how I eventually wanted to be seen as a woman. These male expectations carry over into our transitions. All our energy goes into our appearance and voice so that we aren't so easily read as trans. But by being so caught up in the physical aspect, we miss out on dealing with our internal selves. The most actualized trans women who are at peace and happy with themselves are the ones who are concentrating on the inside realm and comfortable with wherever they may fall on the gender spectrum. That comfort is the success factor. You can look perfectly female, but if you're not at peace with where you are and who you are, you're going to be miserable. My role models are powerful women who achieve success without sacrificing their feminine strength. I say, look good, be happy, and don't take any shit.
I'm going to read one more for you.
One of the transition series I did was of a young man named Aiden, and I followed his transition for 4 years. And page 92, you're almost there, keep going. Page 92 is his final photograph, 2 years after surgery and hormones. And this was his final thoughts on the last photograph that we did. I haven't cried in ages. Sometimes I can squeeze out one tear. I call it my John Wayne tear. Before transition, frustration made me cry. Now, my frustration turns to rage. There is a certain release that comes from crying that you can't get from anything else. With testosterone, that release doesn't come. There's a strain in my throat and chest when I try to cry. I understand men so much more now. I used to think a lot of their behavior were choices or socially trained. But I haven't been trained to stop crying in the last 2 years. I just can't do it. I've tried and I just can't. Hormones really shape our lives. Recently, I was sitting in traffic and I felt pure rage for the first time to the point that I wanted to get out of the car and punch the guy in front of me. The moment I felt that way, I had to call a friend to remind me that that wasn't who I am. It was the testosterone. It was scary to feel that way. It wasn't about my emotional state at all. It was a completely physical reaction to the situation. Because I was aware of it, I was able to calm myself down. And since I've found ways to deal with my physical reactions to things. My dad has always been my role model, along with his amazing group of male friends. They are men who cry. It is said testosterone starts to diminish after a certain age, and maybe that's why men cry more later in life. I look forward to that day. Before we start a Q&A, which will be a lot of fun, I just want to say that as an artist, it has always been my hope to put some kind of social change into motion. And with Transfigurations, I hope that the viewer takes away some kind of knowledge from this work, whether it's breaking down stereotypes of transgender people or questioning your own ideas of what it means to be a man and a woman. I hope you all enjoy this book and find it as moving and as educational as some of the others have. Thank you. Where's Nick Krieger? You're hiding.
So we'd love to take some questions from you folks, talk about anything you want to talk about. Here, come up here. Take the microphone out of the stand, I've been told. Out of the stand. Okay. We can shout. Oh, okay.
choose from for each one that shows in the book? Did you shoot rolls and rolls and rolls?
First of all, I'm going to tell you that I shot this book on an old Mamiya 6x7, 2¼ camera with beautiful old silver
Real
haloid
film. Yeah,
film.
you can tell.
And although the pictures, they were scanned digitally, and if you saw the exhibit, they were printed digitally, but I'll tell you, it's nothing like film. In the beginning, I didn't really know what I was doing, so the first couple people that I photographed came back to the studio a number of times until I kind of figured out what format I was shooting in. But I would shoot a lot of film, I just shoot until it feels right. I always know the minute I get the shot, you know, whoever I'm photographing usually sees me jumping up and down going, that's it, that's the one. And of course the people who I did the transition series of came back to everyone was so wonderful. I mean, they worked with me. Coming back to the studio, you know, Aiden came back 9 days after surgery, Beth came back right after her facial surgery. I mean, everyone was so willing to be in the studio and work with me. It was a wonderful experience, but I shot a lot of film, but it was all film.
My question for you is, we're all here, the book's here, because we're well aware the world is not kind. And yet this room, no one would hurt anybody this way. So how do you account for, this is curious, and you said, I was so interested, but you weren't like your agent immediately, and I have a problem with that. You know, do you have any insight about why some people, it's curious and interesting to most people, because it is invisible, we're unaware until it's in our lives. But, and there are other people for whom it just doesn't seem to matter, that nothing's gonna change their mind.
You know, I think there's.
Could everybody hear that?
No.
Okay, good. I was going to answer now. I mean, I think we're talking about the fact that there's some people that just have a really negative reaction to trans people, and either where does that come from or what can we do? I don't know. That's how I was going to answer it. Or I mean, I think that one of the things we all hold so dear and important to us is who we are as people, our identity, and our sense of gender. And I think that transgender people really threaten people's sense of knowing who they are, because something that someone thinks is born and is true and is never going to change and is concrete and is fact, here comes along someone that says, you know what, it's actually not. You know, sometimes this can get a little, you know, be a tough spot, especially in, you know, I was in the lesbian community for many years, and I'm still, and I'm still very much in just the overall queer community, but, you know, people start to, you know, confuse sexuality and gender, and, you know, this can threaten people. So I think it's a personal threat. It's hard to let someone else just be who they are if it affects the other person. I think that's where, and I think it just also comes from just not knowing trans people. I mean,
Queer is a big
yeah, and these things that the media has either put out there or that they've seen in some movie, and just not knowing. So I'm hoping that part is just yeah.
I think that there's been a lot of really negative imagery of transgender people that have been out in the media for decades, you know, and that's perpetrated a lot of negative feelings back. And so that's why I think things like Nick's book and so much awareness that's happening now in our culture is really helping to break that down. You know, I was just at this gender conference in Seattle called Gender Odyssey, and I think it was one of the first years they actually had a family track where they had children from the ages of like 4 to 12 with their parents, learning about how to, you know, help their children develop and become who they need to be. And at one point, they were on a break, and there were all these children running around in the lobby of the convention center, and they were so happy, because they were so free to just express themselves and be who they were. And I realized in that moment, it was so heart-wrenching that the world is changing right now. Just the fact that their parents were there with them, you know, and that was very exciting to me, that we're living in a time when the gender movement is on the precipice of being the next civil rights movement, you know, and it's exciting.
Anybody?
I see some.
Hi.
Hello. First of all, I saw your exhibit years ago downtown, and I'm so excited that this is For Jana, I'd like to find out first of all, what reactions are you getting now that it is a book, and how will you market it?
The question is, what reactions am I getting from the book and how will I market it? I am very happy to say that I have gotten nothing but the most amazing response and love from people about this work, and it gives me great hope that we can continue to spread a message of awareness, everywhere that it goes. People just love it. I mean, at most of the exhibits, people would be walking through, reading the text and crying, and sometimes it was so overwhelming for me to actually be at one of the receptions that I would have to go outside. The first time I ever showed the work, at my thesis at San Jose State, the mother of a transgender child came up to me and said, "Thank you for letting my child know that they can grow up and be okay." And I just was in tears. And I actually had to leave because as artists, sometimes we work in a vacuum and we don't always know, we don't always know the effect that our work is going to have on the world until it's out there. And when that woman said that to me, and of course all the response that I've gotten now over the years, it's just been incredibly moving for me, and I'm just so happy that I've done something that's been able to help, a group of people. Which of course now I feel a great responsibility to, and a great commitment to continuing to keep that awareness going. Does this mic just suck?
Not if you just speak forward, it won't suck, I promise.
Marketing-wise, well, self-publishing a book is an interesting journey. And, but the word is really spreading about this book very quickly, and so we will see what happens. Question for Nick?
Yes, thank you. What I would like to find out, I'm a therapist, I work a lot with trans people, and I have for decades. Of course, what I would like to know is, how did your family react over the past 5 years?
Have you read the book?
That part of his book.
No, actually, my brother's here. My mom has read the book and my father has not, which we all think is for the better. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. We actually thought it might be a good thing if my dad read the book, but he has not. My mom handled it so well. I think she had the largest issue she had with the book had to do with me talking about my sex life. That was really, she was like, the family stuff was fine, but she didn't really want to be pushing that. She's just, she's really proud of me. She's been, I would say, promoting it a little bit, and I mean, it's been a tough journey, don't get me wrong, but I think she just fundamentally, in the end, just really loves me and is proud of me. So she's been supportive. She came to one of my readings in New York, which was awesome. So thanks.
This is a question for either of you. I hope the answer is no, but has
You have
anybody
to talk
ever?
loud.
I hope the answer is no to this question, but for either of you, has anybody ever regretted the decision once they started, either had surgery, or do you know anybody personally that wish they could go back? I hope that's not true, but is it?
Well, I saw that guy on, what was it?
I don't know what muppet it
One
is.
of those talk shows.
Oh, really? I didn't. Yeah.
I certainly don't know anyone that's regretted it, but when I was, making the decision to decide whether to go on testosterone hormones, I spoke to obviously many people, but I knew some people that started taking hormones and they stopped. And my question to them was, do you regret that? And not one of them said they regretted that. So I definitely know people that have gone on and off hormones actually, and there's many different reasons why people might do this, but I do not know anybody who has regretted anything they've done in any way.
Thanks.
So, Jana, did the people in your book get to meet each other?
The question is, did the people in my book get to meet each other? Well, many of them are here tonight, actually, much to my great joy. I think some of them knew each other, and that's how they sort of referred them, each person to me. I didn't have any grant money to do the work, so all of it was shot in the Bay Area. Did make one trip to LA for a few people, but most of it was down here. And I don't know that they all know each other, but at the Gender Odyssey conference in Seattle last month, everyone who was there was so excited about the book. who was in the book, that they decided to autograph each other's books, and it was really fun. Everybody was signing each other's books, and yeah, it was great. So I don't know if that answers that.
Questions, comments?
In the Good Times article, there was some discussion about surgery that someone went through to make themselves, their appearance more feminine. Could you give me some details of just what was the nature of that surgery?
Transgender women go through much more detailed surgeries than transgender men do, and that's because I believe the hormone estrogen really doesn't take away as many male characteristics they may have had previously as taking testosterone does for women becoming men. Boy, did you follow that? So for those trans women who elect to do so, there's numerous surgeries that they can have, and you can see some examples of it in the book. Some people have gone through facial feminization surgery, which, and I couldn't tell you all the details, I don't remember, but it shaves down the Adam's apple, brow bone, reshapes the jaw, a number of things like that, as well as electrolysis and hair removal and a vaginoplasty, and it's, endless. I mean, I think some people can spend up to $100,000 changing their body completely in the male to female transition.
There's a question back there, yes.
Hi.
Do you think that Chaz Bono being in the media has been a positive thing for trans people who are going through change?
You know, I gotta tell you, Chaz, what a champ, you know. I mean, don't we all want him to win on Dancing with the Stars? You know, I think that anybody who's willing to put himself in the spotlight like that has to be commended. I mean, he is under so much pressure all the time. We had the opportunity to meet him at this gender conference last month, and you know, he's got cameras following him everywhere, recording this second documentary on his life, and now the big hoopla on Dancing with the Stars. But you know, I'm a publicist in my regular life, and so as we always say, any PR is good PR. You know, and in this case, especially for the transgender community. And I think that if anything, it will bring up conversation around who are transgender people, and maybe the world at large will start to want to know who are these people and take the opportunity to learn and understand. And so that can only be a good thing. Those million mothers, or whoever they were, who said that they didn't want their children to see Chaz dancing on Dancing with the Stars. We need to send them some of our books then. Do you want to Chaz?
I don't know how much time do we have. I mean, to answer your question very directly, I think what he's doing is amazing, and it can do nothing but positive things having him out there. And I mean, he's also very, he's charismatic, and I do enjoy kind of watch. He's charming, and he's doing such a good job with who he is, and that's all he can really do is kind of his experience. Our books came out on the same day. I do have a lot of, mine's getting a little crushed by his but you know, as I think, as a writer and a little bit of like an uber intellectual around, I can get into like postmodern, gender theory and that kind of, stuff. I do struggle a little bit with some of the things he says about gender and the way just some of the things he's chosen to write about and say. I think there's a little bit of resistance sometimes within our community or to what he's put out there, and I think that's part of that is just like he's really the only one that's gotten to go out there with his story big time, and we all want our chance too. So that's where my sort of any resistance I have sort of lies, but that's not his job. His job is to be true to himself, and I love watching him dance. The joy on his face, it's really great.
Anybody else? Any questions? We'll take person in the back first, right there.
Have either of you met any resistance from within the trans community upon the publication of your books?
I haven't.
If I'm gonna talk about resistance, I'm really only gonna say probably in like blog comments that I probably shouldn't be reading. It's not very, no one's coming. And yeah, I don't know if resistance is quite the word. I would use something that I acknowledge but can't quite get away from is that as a trans person, I have a pretty privileged experience. I'm white, I'm educated, I live in the Bay Area, I have been able to access surgery and hormones, and this is really not the experience of most trans people. And in my personal opinion, in our culture, the way our world works, it is harder to be a trans woman. So, occasionally I see blog comments that reflect some of that back to me in a way that makes me feel a teeny bit bad, but is, based in truth. But I mean, overall, I've received nothing but positive.
Jana, in reference to that person's question, I thought you could maybe elucidate about what happened at Gender Odyssey with Mateo. That was a good instance.
Thank you, Amy, for reminding me. There was someone, most of the people in the book, I stayed in touch with and am friends with. There was a few people I photographed who I actually never saw again after they did their interview and photograph. And when we were at the Gender Odyssey conference last month, Mateo, actually, who I read to you tonight, was at Gender Odyssey. And I was so happy to see him. It had been 6 years, and I kind of gave him a big hug. And he said, "So, they must have paid you a lot of money to come up here and talk, huh?" So, guess you're getting that book published. Guess you got a lot of money for it, huh? That photo exhibit, they must pay you a lot to speak at universities, huh? And I looked at him and I said, "Is that really what you think?" And what came from our conversation was he really thought I was making money off the transgender community and sort of using them to harness my own career. And I was so surprised because no one has said that to me, and it really took me off guard. And I proceeded to tell him that I spent all of my own money to mount the exhibit, to get through grad school, the help of some incredible donors to get the book published. It's been a labor of love. I think it was yesterday or the day before that the Social Security Administration is finally agreed to no longer send out letters to employers that the gender marker on an employee's application doesn't match their Social Security card. And what that means is that if the gender markers don't match, the Social Security Administration would send a letter to the employer saying this person's gender identity isn't matching. And I think the statistic I read in the article was that over 720,000 letters were sent out last year to employers of people whose gender marker didn't match. And what that means is those employees are now in danger of being put in a very horrible and unfortunate situation. So as of yesterday or the day before, the Social Security Administration has agreed to no longer do that. So that was also a really good and wonderful thing to hear. Do we have one last question for Nick? Okay. We have one question right there. That'll be the last question.
Have you had any real close friends turn against you?
Has he had any close friends turn against him?
No, I haven't. The one I was really, there's actually a character in my book who I'm very close to that I expressed a great deal of fear that I was going to lose this friendship because this person was in my book. That was the only person I've ever worried about losing as a result of being